Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Premier Daniel Smith announces more help for Albertans to deal with inflation and the rising cost of living. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson breaks down some of the help both seniors and parents with young kids will be receiving. And we have an update from the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act from a lawyer who's representing some of those who participated in the Freedom Convoy last February in Ottawa.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A Walmart manager opened fire on fellow employees gathered in the break room of a store in Virginia. 6 people were killed in the U.S.'s second high-profile killing in a handful of days. The other took place at an LGBTQ2+ nightclub in Colorado Springs that left 5 people dead and 19 others wounded.
We are truly saddened at the tragedy that took place in our community last night. And we are all praying for the family, friends, and co-workers of everyone that's affected by this senseless violence. I want to say to them that your Chesapeake community is here for you and will continue to be here for you during the difficult days, months, and years ahead. Our 911 dispatch center received the first call at 10:12 p.m. last night. The first officers arrived on scene within 2 minutes at 10:14 and entered the store approximately 2 minutes later at 10:16. The first responding officers entered the store and the scene was declared safe by 11:20 p.m. 6 victims have died. 4 victims are in area hospitals with conditions unknown at this time, and the suspect is dead from what we believe was a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Wow. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith held her address on Tuesday night. Many are looking at her announcements as a kickoff to the election campaign, which is slated for next May. Some of the highlights include the province eliminating the remaining 4.5 cents per litre of provincial fuel tax. For seniors and families with dependent children under the age of 18, $600 over 6 months will be provided per child and per senior. It'll be targeted for families with household incomes below $180,000 a year. Now, the same $600 amount will be given to those who collect AISH, PPD, and income support. Premier Smith also said that her government will index all provincial tax brackets retroactive to 2022, resulting in larger rebates when taxes are filed. Premier Smith says it was important for her government to address the inflation and affordability crisis, which she blames on the Trudeau Liberals.
The severity of this crisis has been primarily caused by years of record spending and debt by the federal government in Ottawa, combined with a continual string of anti-energy policies that are driving up the price of fuel, electricity, heating, food, and everything else we need to live and raise our families. Too many moms and dads are having to choose between nutritious food for their children and making their rising mortgage payments. Many seniors are choosing between filling their needed prescriptions and fuel for their vehicles. As a province, we can't solve this inflation crisis on our own. But due to our strong fiscal position and balanced budget, we can offer substantial relief so Albertans and their families are better able to manage through this storm.
Needless to say, the opposition NDP was not impressed with Premier Smith's announcements. Alberta's NDP leader Rachel Notley says many of the new spending initiatives by the UCP are from undoing problems the party originally created.
What we just heard was Danielle Smith claiming she's going to undo the affordability crisis that the UCP government has actually contributed to by reversing many of their own bad decisions. Decisions that have cost Albertans well over $2 billion to date. We're not buying it, and neither should you. In fact, many people won't remember, but 6 months prior to the last election, the UCP voted to increase benefits for vulnerable Albertans, only to then break that promise within weeks of taking office. Here we go again. We couldn't trust the UCP then, and we definitely can't trust them now. The same is true in healthcare, where Smith and the UCP have been sowing chaos in our hospitals, our ambulances, and our doctors' offices.
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, says when it comes to a break at the pumps for Albertans, the Premier Smith announced, it'll be long-term.
And it sounds like it may be gone forever at some point. There was sort of this hint in her speech that it was going to be sort of an indefinite removal of the fuel tax. So, people see about 4.5 cents off the cost of gas in the next little bit here, and then certainly continuing. And that's for at least the next 6 months. And then they're looking at some way to sort of make it more permanent. That's one of the measures, and I think probably the one that people are going to notice the most immediately.
Mr. Dawson will also discuss how the Alberta Sovereignty Act will be Premier Smith's first order of business when the legislature returns next week. He'll have details coming up in the second half of our show. The province announced it is investing $15 million over the next few years to help Albertans with addiction and mental health services. Government officials say this will double the funding and enable call centres to increase capacity to help more Albertans. It will also connect calls from rural and Indigenous communities with proper support. The expansion of 211 services will also develop and implement specialized navigation supports for children, youth, and families. Sheila Annette Lewis is an Alberta woman who's in dire need of an organ transplant. She says because she refused the COVID-19 vaccine, AHS has taken her off a wait list to receive a life-saving organ. Lewis describes her disease and how it's affecting her and what her specialist told her.
He said to me, if there was any disease that you could have, I would wish for you to have something other than what you have, because you will suffer. Today, I know what he's talking about, because if I walk across the kitchen, or if I walk down to my room, or go in another room, I'm gasping for air, and I have to grab another tank and put another hose on my face to get some oxygen back. So it's not an easy choice to make when one side of the coin is a vaccine and the other side of the coin is the door that opens up for death.
Make sure you catch the very emotional interview with Sheila Annette Lewis and BCN's Naveen Day coming up in the second half of our program. There's been some drama unfolding during the last week of testimonies at the public inquiry into the government's use of the Emergencies Act. One of the Freedom Convoy protest lawyers, Brendan Miller, was temporarily removed from the proceedings. We've also been hearing some of the ministers, including Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino. Eva Chipiuk is a lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. She's in Ottawa fighting for some of those protesters who participated in the Freedom Convoy last February. Eva, what are your thoughts on what we've heard from government ministers so far this week, including from Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino?
Well, there was so much discussion around these protesters being racists and terrorists and extremists. And the only shred of evidence that the government could point to was a Nazi flag and a Confederate flag. Yet when asked about what the government and CSIS did to investigate those people, blank faces. And it was particularly disturbing to hear Marco Mendicino's response to Brendan Miller's there. He actually went so far to say, I don't even recall seeing those pictures. I don't know what you're talking about.
So how are your clients feeling after hearing so many testimonies the past few weeks at the public inquiry into the government's use of the Emergencies Act?
The federal government is really missing the key component of why the protesters were here in the first place. And it was to have be recognized by anybody in federal government, because it was about federal government overreach that the protesters were here. And although we heard the catchphrases, we used every tool in the toolbox and we didn't want to leave any stone unturned, when we look at all the documents, we're hard pressed to see any resemblance of an engagement with the protesters. And when it came to talking to the protesters, all these hurdles would be thrown up. Like, we don't know who the leaders are and it doesn't seem organized. So many hurdles are being thrown forward. You know what? It's not too hard to figure out who's at your front steps.
Thanks so much for your time, Eva. That was Eva Chipiuk, lawyer with the Justice Centre, joining us from the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act from Ottawa. And still to take the stand is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Friday. Bill C-11, also known as the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, is going through the Senate right now, and by next week, senators will have the opportunity to put forward some amendments with the hope some changes will be made to the bill. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas says there are some big amendments that need to be made since it will have such a major impact on Canadians if the bill passes.
One is user-generated content. In other words, the things that you would post, I would post, Canadians would post online should not be captured by this legislation, which means the government will be censoring what Canadians are saying, what they are hearing, and what they are posting online. It really has an impact on all Canadians because we all use the online space. It's the new form of the public square. It's where we exchange ideas. Bill C-11 will censor what we see, what we say, what we hear online. And so every single Canadian is impacted by this legislation in its current form.
Thomas is encouraging Canadians to reach out to Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez, who's defending the bill, to simply have C-11 stopped. Well, we saw some moisture in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. The rain cloud should be leaving us fairly soon. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, more sunshine and double-digit temperatures are on the way?
Yes, they sure are, Hal. And you know, considering there was rain in the forecast today, it stayed rather sunny for the most part in Lethbridge today. Mostly just a lot of slush and ice and melting in the parking lot. So not the greatest for the shoes. Definitely feeling more like spring right now than fall weather. As we look ahead to Thursday, we're seeing the sunshine remain. We're climbing up to the double digits there, up to 10 degrees tomorrow. And those double digits are just getting started because it's going to get even warmer on Friday. I'll be back later on in the show to let you know all those details.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Each year, Samaritan's Purse launches their Operation Christmas Child campaign. Now, Canadians fill shoeboxes with toys, school supplies, and personal hygiene items to give to needy kids around the world. Frank King is the News Media Relations Manager with Samaritan's Purse Canada, and he just returned from Costa Rica, where many of those shoeboxes were handed out to the kids. Frank joins us now from Calgary. Frank, how happy were the children in Costa Rica to receive the goodies?
It's an amazing thing how to see the difference in the reactions, because some kids are super excited. They're opening their boxes, are going through their stuff. They're sitting usually beside someone at these distribution events, so they're showing their stuff. They're trading with them, which is great. Other kids, they'll open it up, they'll carefully look at it, and then they'll close the lid and they won't open it up again because they're going to take it home and show it to their parents and their siblings, and they don't want to disturb what they received. So it's just amazing to see the different reactions from kids based on their own personalities. And we have Canadians to thank for all that, because without generous Canadians, there's no shoeboxes to give these children in need simple joy and hope.
So how long will the campaign continue, and how many countries will Samaritan's Purse be reaching this year?
The actual campaign itself, in terms of packing physical shoeboxes, it's finished. National Collection Week wrapped up on Sunday. However, people can continue to pack shoeboxes for children in need year-round at packabox.ca. In fact, that's how my wife and I pack our shoeboxes every year, is packabox.ca, because it's just so convenient. And yeah, it makes so much sense. We will reach approximately 100 or so countries between Samaritan's Purse offices in Canada, the US, Germany, UK, Australia, and South Korea. So each of those offices has a specific area of the world where they're concentrating on, and ours is Central America, West Africa, and the neat thing is this year, it's also the Philippines and Ukraine.
Thanks so much, Frank. That was Frank King, News Media Relations Manager from Samaritan's Purse Canada, joining us from Calgary. The Shoes for Kids YQL Foundation continues to hand out shoes to kids in need all across southwestern Alberta. The foundation is saying thank you after receiving a couple of donations that will help them to continue to provide shoes for those most in need.
We've served from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. And I think one of the biggest joys that we're seeing right now is athletes being able to come forward through their school accounts or student support, because let's say a student is playing basketball, they may be in need of basketball shoes and runners, and they can't play those extracurricular activities without a good pair of shoes. So we've been able to just continue to expand not only our collaborations with school districts, but also through community donations as well.
Shoes for Kids is not just a back-to-school initiative, but offers year-round support. If you're interested in donating shoes, you can do so by emailing the foundation directly. Yeah, the sound of dismay was heard in downtown Lethbridge at Festival Square on Wednesday afternoon. Canada kicked off their first game of the World Cup versus a heavily favoured Belgium, and unfortunately Canada missed on a penalty kick. Sadly, Canada lost the match 1-0 to the number 2 ranked Belgian team. Officials from the Lethbridge Soccer Association say it was a huge day for soccer or football fans in the Windy City, regardless of the loss.
It means a lot. Like it just shows you the passion of the soccer fans, right? It doesn't matter if their team's in or not, or if they're cheering for Canada, or like my team's Italy and they're not in, but Canada's now my team I'm cheering for, right? So soccer players, soccer teams, like we're all passionate and we're ready to go, kind of thing. It's been 36 years in the building, right, building up, and we're all excited that Canada's in, and hopefully it builds the game in Canada, in Alberta, Lethbridge, right? Hopefully there's a trickle-down effect, and we're just excited that we're here.
Canada's next match is November 27th versus Croatia. They'll then take on Morocco on December the 1st. Go Team Canada. Mayor Blaine Higgin is set to don his pads for a good cause on November the 27th. The Mayor's Community Hockey Challenge is a fun game of shinny that raises money and food donations for our local food banks. As video journalist Mike Quinn explains now, the fundraiser from our mayor coincides with a huge fundraising announcement for Alberta food banks by the province.
Over the next 2 years, we will be providing $20 million to Alberta food banks and civil society organizations across our province.
Jeremy Nixon, the Alberta Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, says the funding will also benefit rural areas in Alberta.
That's $10 million this year, $10 million next year. With the matching funds, we're hoping to see that leverage to be $50 million this year, $50 million next year.
Ariana Scott, the CEO of Food Banks Alberta, says the money will go directly to families who are feeling the pinch with the rising cost of living and inflation.
We hear from our members every day that the number of new clients coming through the door is increasing exponentially every month.
Speaking of funding for food banks, here in Lethbridge, Mayor Blaine Higgin will be lacing up his skates and putting on his best goalie pads on November 27th at 4 p.m. at the ATB Centre. The Mayor's Community Hockey Challenge fundraiser will benefit the Lethbridge Food Bank and the Interfaith Food Bank. Last year, $4,500 was raised through food and monetary donations. Higgin says the goal for 2022 is to exceed that number from last year, and he explained exactly what the two teams are going to look like during the game.
There's going to be about 14, 15 players aside, and it'll be a city group against stakeholders in the community.
According to a recent report by Food Banks Canada, Albertans accessed food banks more than double the national rate compared to pre-pandemic levels. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Well, it's going to feel a lot like spring over the next few days. Be prepared for more double-digit temperatures and slushy road conditions. Full weather details are coming up. Well, we had kind of a mixed bag today. Sunshine, clouds, and even some rain in parts of southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it may be a good time to load up on the windshield washer fluid since the meltdown is on for our region.
Oh, the great meltdown is certainly on, Hal. So yes, now would be probably the best time to top up that washer fluid because we are going to probably be using it quite a bit in the next few days as we see that mercury rise significantly. Going all the way up to 10 degrees on Thursday. Lots of sunshine remaining into Friday. And look at that temperature there. We're looking at a high of 12 degrees on Friday and 6 degrees on Saturday. Still not bad at all considering this time of year. Average high is 2 degrees, so we're going to be well above that. Then we're going to dip down to 0 on a Sunday with mainly cloudy skies, and then look what happens Monday and Tuesday. We're going to hit that deep freeze once again, going down to -11 as the expected high for Monday and a high of only -13 on Tuesday, and we're looking at a 60% chance of flurries for both of those days. Now, the average high for this time of year, as I mentioned, 2 degrees, average low -9, so we're going to be well above that tomorrow and Friday and well below that come Monday and Tuesday next week. Now, 16, that was our high temperature on this day back in 2005, and the record low for this day was in 1996, and it was recorded at -33. 7:55, that's when the sun rose this morning, and our sunset this afternoon at 4:40 p.m., giving us only 8 hours and 45 minutes of daylight. So getting shorter and shorter and shorter by the day. As we look to the west coast tomorrow, we're seeing increasing clouds in Victoria tomorrow, high of 10 degrees, 9 degrees, the expected high tomorrow in Vancouver with partly cloudy skies and fog dissipating in the morning. Sunshine expected tomorrow in Edmonton with a high of 9 degrees and a high of 7 tomorrow in Calgary with a clearing skies. As we look to the rest of the prairie, Saskatoon sitting at 0 degrees tomorrow to the high for Regina with dissipating clouds there, giving us mainly sunny skies. Mostly a sunny day as well tomorrow expected in Winnipeg with a high of 1 degree. As we look to the central part of the country, Toronto seeing mainly clear skies, 9 degrees the high there. Increasing clouds tomorrow in Ottawa, 3 degrees the high there, and the expected high for tomorrow is 0 in Montreal with mainly clear skies. As we look to the east coast, Atlantic Canada, Fredericton sitting at -1 tomorrow, 0 the high in Halifax, -2 in Charlottetown. St. John sitting at -2, but they are expected blowing snow and a wind warning in effect up to 2 centimeters of snow. Snow squall by the afternoon and 80 kilometer per hour winds. So lots going on in St. John's tomorrow. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
There are 6 unionized Starbucks stores in Canada, and organizers say efforts to build that number are starting to gain traction. They face legislative barriers, however, and alleged anti-union activity by the Seattle-based coffee giant. Unions in both Canada and the United States, along with the U.S. Labor Board, have accused Starbucks of anti-union activity, such as disciplining union organizers and withholding wage increases. The company denies those allegations. Personal computer and printer maker HP has reported a fourth quarter loss of $2 million. The company says its earnings, when adjusted for one-time gains and costs, were 85 cents per share. Now, that was better than analysts had expected. HP posted revenue of $14.8 billion. For the year, HP reported a profit of $3.2 billion and revenue of nearly $63 billion. Lawyers for FTX say a large amount of assets have been stolen from the accounts of the collapsed cryptocurrency exchange, diminishing the odds that its millions of investors will get their money back. The admission came during FTX's first court appearance since the company filed for bankruptcy protection on November the 11th. Such hearings typically happen days after a filing. This one was delayed, however, because FTX's collapse came suddenly and management kept very few records. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 62 points on the day to finish at 20,282. The Dow was up 95 points to 34,194. The S&P 500 was up 23 on the day to 4,027, and the Nasdaq was up 110 points to 11,285. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $3.59 to $77.36 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 53 cents to $7.31 U.S. Gold was up $9.32 to $17.49.57 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up 45 cents to $21.53 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.63 per bushel, barley's at $9.80, canola's at $18.50, and corn is at $11.63 per bushel. Live cattle were down 45 cents to $153.35. Feeder cattle January contract was down $2.43 to $179.25, and lean hogs were down 30 cents to $83.95. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.88 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, Premier Danielle Smith held her provincial address on Tuesday night. Many are looking at the announcements as a kickoff to the election campaign. The provincial election is slated for May. Some of the highlights included the UCP eliminating the remaining 4.5 cents per litre of provincial fuel tax. And for seniors and families with dependent children under the age of 18, $600 over 6 months will be provided per child and per senior. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, will have more details as to what help the province is offering to tackle inflation and the high cost of living in just a moment. If you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith addressed Albertans on Tuesday night. She spoke about a whole number of affordability measures meant to tackle inflation. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining us from Edmonton. Now, Tyler, one of the announcements is that the remaining 4.5 cents of provincial fuel tax will be taken off once again.
And it sounds like it may be gone forever at some point. You know, there was sort of this hint in her speech that it was going to be sort of an indefinite removal of the fuel tax. So, you know, people see about 4.5 cents off the cost of gas in the next little bit here, and then certainly continuing. And that's for at least the next 6 months. And then they're looking at some way to sort of make it more permanent. So yeah, that's one of the measures, and I think probably the one that people are going to notice the most immediately.
Premier Smith also announced $600 per child checks to families and $600 per senior, and that'll roll out, over the next 6 months as well?
That's right. Yeah, the timelines are not super specific at this point, whether that, you know, $100 a month or $200 every 3 months. Every $300 every math is not my strong suit, Hal. But at any rate, there is going to be $600 per child and $600 per senior. It is somewhat means tested. It's capped at family income of about, I think, $180,000. So, you know, those family incomes higher than that won't receive those checks. And of course, those without children will not receive checks either, unless, of course, they're a senior. So this is not quite a return to the Ralph Bucks or even what Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe did over there with $500 checks. But certainly something that a lot of parents are going to be happy about in the next few months, because, of course, we're going into Christmas, and Christmas and New Year is usually a pretty sort of tight financial time for families.
Yeah, I remember those Ralph Bucks, the dividend checks. Was it $300 or $400 per every man, woman, and child? Those are the good old days with the royalties.
The good old days.
But Tyler, what about financial help for those of us who have adult kids and are not yet seniors?
I'm sorry to say you're out of luck, Hal, and you know, I am too. Don't have kids and also not a senior. So, you know, we are well, maybe we should be used to it by now. You know, people with kids and seniors get all the goodies. But you know, the real, you know, to be serious about it for a minute, I think part of what is going on here is that those are the cohorts of people that tend to vote. Seniors vote in really high numbers. Peoples with families are very invested in the political process. So I think that's a thing worth considering. You know, when single folks aren't getting tons of government money here and there, maybe it's because we're not voting. So just a little aside, a personal bugbear of mine over the years, you know.
Now, naturally, the opposition NDP was unimpressed with Premier Smith's address. Rachel Notley said Smith was undoing problems the UCP had originally created.
Well, and I mean, she's not wrong about that to some extent. The other part of what happened on Tuesday night was she announced that they were going to be re-indexing a bunch of social programs and income tax. So if you were on assured income for the severely handicapped, the AISH program, you got X amount of money, and it went up with inflation every year. So in the 2019 budget, the government stop doing that. So the amount of money you received in 2019 or 2020 has remained the same, of course, as the cost of everything else has gone up. And the same has happened with income tax. So that was a UCP policy decision made, you know, in a very different budgetary environment to the one we're in right now. And Danielle Smith is undoing that. So I mean, in that sense, Rachel Notley is, I think, more or less correct. And the other thing that she's really been hammering on her social media in her remarks and things like that is that the NDP is trying to promise stable, competent government. And I think that's going to be a theme. You know, there's been a few sort of small scandals with Danielle Smith, some ups and downs, a little bit of a bumpy road, let's say, in the opening weeks. And I think that's very much the tone that Rachel Notley is going to try and set over the next few months. And we saw a little bit of that on Tuesday night in her response to Danielle Smith's remarks.
Yeah, you know, Tyler, it should be a huge battle. I mean, the Alberta provincial election is coming up next May, and healthcare is back in the spotlight once again, as it should be. Now, some of it stems from a position paper Premier Smith wrote for the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy. Can you explain?
Sure. So I won't go too into detail on it because it's all really complicated, but sort of the Coles Notes version of it is that this paper sort of imagined a new way of healthcare delivery. And one of the things that has come up and been discussed is that the health spending account, which is going to be, I think, $375 per Albertan to spend on any sort of healthcare they want, the proposal seems to be that at some point, a health spending account of some size might be the way that we would pay for healthcare. It wouldn't be out of pocket necessarily. It would be government money. We just sort of have an account to spend from. So it's this sort of reimagining of healthcare that was in this position paper. Whether or not that's going to translate directly into government policy is a little bit harder to say. We simply don't know at this point. But it has given the NDP the chance to do what, of course, they love to do politically, which is talk about American-style healthcare, raise the specter of people paying for healthcare out of pocket, running out of money, and not being able to afford health services, things like that. So that debate has broken out into the open, maybe a little bit earlier than we would have expected, because of this position paper, and it's forced Danielle Smith to say, no, look, I support universal healthcare, and sort of make that commitment. So bit of, you could quibble over whether or not the NDP's attacks are fair on this, but that discussion's back, and we're 6 months out.
My family was shocked recently when one of my family members went to see a nurse practitioner here in Lethbridge just for a referral to a doctor and to a specialist. And one of my family members was charged $150 for just that referral from the nurse practitioner. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I reached out to Steve Buick, Copping's, the press secretary there. He says, that's not right. They shouldn't have done that. But then I looked up on AHS's website and it says, well, if the nurse practitioner is not practicing in a doctor's office or hospital, they're allowed to do that. So that was quite interesting. Now, still with healthcare, the entire AHS board was fired last week, Tyler, and replaced with a single administrator, a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Cowell. Cowell was, I believe, in a similar role years ago with the Redford administration. What will Dr. Cowell's biggest challenges be?
Well, yeah, so Dr. Cowell came out of retirement for this. He joked in his press conference that he'd finally got his golf score down to his age and had to give that up to come back to work. So he is really facing a number of problems. The emergency room wait times are one of them. Ambulance response times, the number of ambulances on the road, are others. And so he's basically got 6 months to make a pretty big dent in some of these issues. Now, some of the policies changes that are, and so he's going to be studying this. He wasn't coming in and saying, look, X, Y, Z is going to happen. Here's how we're going to fix it. He's sort of going to look at the situation, look at the metrics, what the situation is now, and what it could be down the road. Some of the things that they're sort of planning on changing could, I think, be done relatively quickly. A good example of that was the possibility that 911 dispatch operators could refer people to HealthLink, to the health line that people call to discuss health issues, instead of having an ambulance dispatched. If an ambulance isn't necessarily needed, they might dispatch a different style of vehicle to transport someone, things like that. But on things like surgical wait times and emergency room overcrowding, these are big problems that governments have been trying to tackle for decades, I would say. So that's really the big challenge that he's going to face, is how is he going to come at these really substantial problems that people have been demanding fixes on for a long time, and no one has quite figured it out. So I think every Albertan is probably wishing him all the best on figuring out those problems, because there's no easy answers in there, I don't think.
And I believe he'll answer directly to Health Minister Jason Copping and then Premier Danielle Smith as well. Tyler,
yes,
we always
right.
talk about the UCP and the NDP. It seems like really a two-party system here in Alberta, similar down to the United States, south of the border, with the Republicans and the Democrats. But the Alberta Party here in our province is starting to make a little bit of headway with their leader, Barry Morishita, who had kind of a decent showing at the recent by-election of Brooks Medicine Hat, which was won by Danielle Smith.
He did, yeah. Danielle Smith, I think, had around 6,000 votes, and the New Democrat candidate, Gwendolyn Dirk, had 2,500 or 3,000, and I think Barry Morishita came in about 1,000 votes below that. So a reasonably good showing for a third party, I think. He is planning on running in Brooks Medicine Hat again, which is where he lives, former mayor of Brooks, I believe. So, but he was saying just the other day that they're planning on running candidates in all 87 ridings, and they're holding a convention in the next couple weeks in Edmonton. So there is sort of this third party option, this middle of the road option, if people are not super enthused on either side of the spectrum. Of course, I think both the New Democrats and the United Conservatives are going to be looking at this wondering just how strong the Alberta Party is going to be and whether or not that's going to split the vote a little bit. It's a less obvious vote split maybe than an obviously right-wing party or an obviously left-wing party, but you might see some votes bleed from either side over to the Alberta Party. So we'll have to see. I think people are interested in Barry Morishita, and I think people know of him, especially in Brooks Medicine Hat. And I can't think of, the former leader, I think, was Stephen Mandel, which is a very different political career than Barry Morishita's had.
I believe Mandel was, the mayor of Edmonton at one point in time, right? And I remember having Mandel on our show, and I asked him, I said, well, how would you sum up the Alberta Party? He says, we're socially liberal, but we're fiscally conservative. I thought that was quite interesting. Tyler, the legislature returns next week. We should be seeing the usual pomp and ceremony of his speech from the throne and the return of question period. But what's also on the docket is the Alberta Sovereignty Act.
That should be the first thing that happens, I think. It's going to be really interesting. Now, in her remarks Tuesday and in a speech recently, I think to the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, Danielle Smith sort of gave us the full name of the Alberta Sovereignty, and it's a bit of a mouthful. It's Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. So, say that 10 times fast. So that is what it's going to be called. The details of it are still, a little bit shrouded in mystery. There's been a lot of speculation, I think, on whether or not it's going to sort of hew to the original sort of vision that was laid out in the Free Alberta strategy, whether or not there's going to be some moderation of some of the more out there elements, I guess one could say. So we'll have to see what it's going to look like. But the thing I did want to mention was was a really interesting development in the last few days where all of the treaty chiefs in Alberta got together, maybe the first time ever they've all gotten together and agreed on something, and basically said they don't like the Sovereignty Act. They don't agree with it. They say that they made their agreements with the Crown, not with the government of Alberta, and that the Alberta government cannot do anything that's going to sort of unilaterally change that. So it's a really interesting show of unity among all the chiefs in Alberta. And the Premier's office said, look, consultations are coming with Indigenous Albertans, and we are going to not affect their, treaty rights and treaty agreement with the federal government. But it's just an interesting dynamic, and I think we're very much going to hear about that in the days ahead.
Tyler, Todd Loewen, Danielle Smith's Parks Minister, has been tasked with attempting to wrestle cash away from Parks Canada and keep it here in the province. Tell me more about that.
This is an interesting one. I think it's a sign of some of the little side battles we might see between this government and Ottawa. The premise is basically that parks fees paid at the gate, $21 or whatever it is to go in for the day, those fees should stay in Alberta. And as it currently works, those fees go into the Parks Canada pot, and they're sort of redistributed around the country to the various national parks. Alberta has 4 of them, of course, and they cover, I think, about 25% of park operating costs. And the parks, of course, are run and operated by Parks Canada, the federal government, not the Alberta government. So, do I think this is going to be a winning battle for the Alberta government? It doesn't strike me, frankly, as super likely. But it is interesting to see that they are opening up some of these new frontiers, I think, in feuding with the federal government.
There was some recent controversy involving Premier Danielle Smith over her ancestry. Tyler, APTN originally broke the story that investigated Smith's claims of having Cherokee heritage. What did they find out?
Well, so they basically went through American records, and there's quite good records for the Cherokee in particular in the United States because of the relocation, I think, to Oklahoma or from Oklahoma. My history on it, my grasp of the history is not super great, but basically they couldn't find any evidence that Danielle Smith had Cherokee heritage. They tracked back ancestors by the same names and stuff like that, and couldn't find a record of it. So an interesting story there. And so I got comment from Premier Smith's office, and what they said was, look, these were stories told around the kitchen table, and she has not done a thorough deep dive into her family history, but she remains proud of her roots. I suspect this is not a thing that's going to go away for her just yet, but it is just because, I don't think she's been asked about it at a press conference or in public, but it is, just another issue that she's going to have to deal with in the weeks ahead.
Very interesting, absolutely. He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
you may have heard about a very interesting case here in Alberta. Sheila Annette Lewis is one of many Canadians being pressured to take the COVID vaccine. Now, what's unique about Annette is that she has a terminal medical condition and needs an organ transplant to survive. Alberta Health Services physicians have allegedly removed her from the high-priority organ transplant waiting list because she refuses to take the COVID-19 vaccine. The question is this unethical, and some would say immoral, to deny life-saving surgery in this case? We are now joined by Sheila Annette Lewis to hear her side of the story. Sheila, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Now, can you tell us what kind of impact this has had on you once you heard that you were refused surgery because of your refusal to get the COVID jab?
Well, it was a lot of mental anguish. There was anger. There was stress, disbelief, depression, you name it. It's all there, and it's there every day still. And as days go on, it just gets worse. Like, for example, I haven't been out of my house for 6 months. I have not been out of my house for 6 months. I can't go to a grocery store. I cannot go pay a bill at a bank. I cannot do nothing. I tried. It was on Saturday last weekend. My sons were here and they helped me with the hookup of my oxygen, of course. And I made it as far as the vehicle, which is 2 feet in front of my house. And my oxygen levels went from 99, which they're supposed to be at, or 98, to 56 within, 40 seconds, 50 seconds. So yeah, so I immediately tugged on the cord, because that's our cue. Tug on the cord if you're panicking or you're in distress or whatever. I just yanked that cord and they knew to bring me back in. So my son came out and got me. He brought out another tank to help me get oxygen first. And then when I got a little bit of oxygen in me, excuse me, they took me back in the house and I couldn't go to the appointment. And that was the first time I tried in about 6 months, because it was an important appointment, very important, that I get this done. But I couldn't get it done because I didn't have enough oxygen in my blood to go. So that's how close we're getting. So I'm angry and I'm scared. Yes, I am. And I got a lot to live for. I really do. And I got grandchildren. I got children, like they're grown men, but they're my kids. I'm 58 years old and I don't want to die. I done everything this transplant asked me to do, and it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. This vaccine got in the way.
And 58 is not old at all. You definitely have a lot of life left to live. And I can't imagine what it must be like to be confined in your house. But Annette, many people I'm sure have asked you, why not just get the vaccine? If your life is already in jeopardy without this transplant surgery, why don't you just get the jab so you can get your surgery?
I had 2 expert immunologists in a lower course testify on my behalf, and they have 30 years experience. One has 30 years, Dr. Brian Bridle, and the other expert witness has 35, Dr. Bonnie Millard. She also testified that the mRNA spike protein that's in the vaccine will travel to the organ that I need to survive.
Oh, wow.
And it will kill me.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of people say the same thing. They ask the same question. If I'm faced with death, like if I have a death sentence in front of me, why not get this vaccine? Because if I get it, it's going to travel to the organ that I need the transplant for. And I won't make that table. I will not make it to the table. I know I won't. When you put a lottery, $1 million lottery, like Alberta did, Jason Kenney did, on the table for anybody to get that vaccine, come and get the vaccine. We're going to have a lottery for $1 million. That tells me something right there about that vaccine. Never in history has there ever been a lottery on a vaccine. The transplant team, one of the conditions to get on a transplant was to get all my childhood vaccines all over again, because they couldn't find the chart for my childhood vaccines that I took already. So I said, fine, I redid them all, every one of them. Got them all done. It took a year. And I got every vaccine they asked me to do until COVID-19 vaccine hit the table. It wasn't a written policy. That policy was not a written policy. They sat on it around the table, made a clinical decision on a vaccine that had no written policy at the time.
So some say that you are an anti-vaxxer, but you just said that you went along with your doctor's advice to get your childhood vaccines updated then.
I'm definitely not an anti-vaxxer, believe me, in any way, shape, or form. I got every vaccine, and believe me, there's a lot of childhood vaccines that we forget about, but there was a lot I had to redo. I got all my paperwork, I got all the credentials, a copy of everything I redone as a vaccine as a child. I got them all done. And no, I'm definitely not anti-vaccine, believe me. I'm only anti-vaccine when it comes to COVID-19 only. Any other vaccine, I got the flu shot 2 years in a row they asked me to. They told me my boys had to get the vaccine. And I said, why would my boys need to get a COVID-19 vaccine? Well, to protect you. And I said, but if I get the vaccine, ain't I protected? Well, yes, but your sons need to get it as well. And I said, oh, it didn't make sense to me. So there's so many things around it that didn't make sense at all. And I got the flu vaccine. They told me to get it, so I went and got it. Never in my life did I get a flu vaccine because I was very healthy. And I was young. I didn't think I needed it. So I went and got it 2 years in a row because they told me to. I done everything you can imagine that transplant team asked me to do. I done it. And I made it to the transplant list. I was very, very healthy. The only thing I'm not healthy is the organ that I need for the transplant. Every other organ I have is very healthy. They're all tested. I am very healthy. My heart is very healthy. Everything.
Now, Annette, did these doctors ever test you to see if you are naturally immune to COVID-19? And if not, did you ever ask them to test you? And what did they say?
I asked doctors, we'll call him Dr. B, like in the court papers. I asked him on a Zoom call late, I believe it was late. No, it was early this year. I think it was the beginning of 2022. I asked them to test me for COVID-19, to test me for immune.
Like an immunity test.
Yes, thank you. And he said, we don't do that anymore. And I said, what are you talking about? You don't do it anymore. He said, no, they don't do that anymore, Annette. And I said, well, I'd like to be tested to see if I've had COVID before. I know I did. I've had the flu before. I had it in 2020, the end of 2020, around November, December 2020. I had it twice within 1 month. And I was sick, really sick. And that was before I got really bad. So I asked him to test me. And to this day, he said he would get back to me about it, but they never ever did. They've never tested me for natural immunity.
Now, have you ever seen a written COVID-19 vaccine policy from the doctors or from AHS?
Nope. The director of the transplant team for the program admitted, how am I going to put this? Admitted that the hospital where the transplant was going to be done has a written finished COVID-19 vaccine policy, but I have never ever seen it. Ever. And there's a policy standing. So in other words, there's a policy standing in the way of me in a transplant. But they've never showed it to me, and I've never seen it, ever.
And now we've already established that you're not anti-vax and you're following advice from medical experts that say taking the COVID-19 shot could actually kill you. You took your case all the way to the Alberta Court of Appeal, arguing that your charter rights to conscience, life, liberty, and security of the person were being violated. But the court ruled against you. What were some of the reasons given by the court?
Well, the reason, it was like they protect, I really don't know. I didn't go over the affidavit that clear. But all I know is they protected the doctors. And by protecting the doctors, They sentenced me to death. And they also put a gag order on me, of course, that I can't speak to anybody about any of the name of the organ I need, the place of the hospital, or the doctor's name. So that gag order will be in place until I die. I can never ever speak. Yeah, I can never speak about it ever. So they silenced me when it comes to my rights. They took away all my rights, especially in the Alberta Bill of Rights. They took them all away, and they also took away freedom of speech. That I can't speak to people like you. I can't tell you my story the way I want to be told in order to help other people. Because this story is not just my story. It's a Canadian people's story. And I need people to understand it's not just the fact of saying no to a vaccine. It's just a whole story behind that. It's whether that vaccine is going to do more damage to me than I need before I get a transplant, if I get a transplant. And I'm not saying I deserve a transplant. I would love to have a transplant. It would be an honor, a miracle to get a donor and be accepted and get that call, that life-saving call. I waited for that for so long. And now I ain't gonna get it. And I'm sorry. And I will die. And it's not very long from now. And it's really scary. And I want to live to see my kids and my grandbabies. I just want to live. And nobody's letting me do that because nobody wants to help. The only hope that I have now, I'm really sorry. I usually don't do this.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm usually a pretty strong person. But the only hope I have now is Danielle Smith. She is my only hope, the Premier. And Tracy Allard and the MP from Grand Prairie. They are my only hope. And if they don't help overturn the policy, then that's it for me. I probably got about 6 months left, if that. Yeah. It's like breathing through a straw. Like I said, I can't go inside my house no more. And sometimes I think when it's late at night and I'm sitting here by myself, and I think maybe it's just easy to do what the Prime Minister is telling us.
But that could
Sometimes
kill you.
Exactly. But it's better than suffering. This disease that I have, a specialist told me in Edmonton, is a wonderful, wonderful man he was. And I seen him for the first part of my disease. And he looked at me in the office one day, and I'll never forget him. He was from the East Coast. He's a wonderful specialist from Grand Prairie. And he said to me, if there was any disease that you could have, I would wish for you to have something other than what you have, because you will suffer an awful, awful death, because it suffocates you. It will smother you. And believe me, I didn't really understand to the depth, really, of what he was talking, because I could breathe pretty good back then. You're talking 4 years ago, three and a half years ago. And today I know what he's talking about, because if I walk across the kitchen, or if I walk down to my room, or go in another room, I'm gasping for air, and I have to grab another tank and put another hose on my face to get some oxygen back. So It's not an easy choice to make when one side of the coin is a vaccine and the other side of the coin is the door that opens up for death. So it's like it's a balancing act. Which one do you choose? Do you choose death, or do you choose a vaccine that you know is going to cause you death?
It's such an unimaginable predicament that you're in. And just a note of word for our viewers, we are not allowed to discuss what organ is being affected, the name of the hospital or the doctor, just so you're aware of that. Now, there is a campaign underway that is encouraging Albertans to contact Premier Danielle Smith and/or Health Minister Jason Copping to ask them to intervene. Do you hold out any hope of that working?
Yeah, hope is what I got. And Danielle Smith, to me, is a strong leader. At least that's what I see. She's a strong leader. She's got, she gives the Albertans hope. And she gave me hope. When I heard her story, when she went on and she said, the most discriminated people are the unvaccinated people. And she didn't lie. Everybody in Canada knows that. But that woman, I think, is a very strong woman. And that's what Alberta needs. We need somebody that's going to stand up for Albertans. We need somebody that's going to speak for Albertans when it comes to Ottawa. And yeah, I have a lot of hope for her. I really do. I would love to meet this woman. I can't get out, so my chances are probably nil. But I would love to meet her and shake her hand and just ask her if there's any possible way that you can overturn this policy so I don't die. And that's all I want. I don't want anything in life. I just want to live and enjoy life, enjoy my kids, my grandkids. I want to work. And I want to meet people. And if I was to live, I know what I would do. I would advocate for people what happened to me, and I would try to help them. That is my goal. If I was ever to get transplanted, is to help people that's in a position where they can't help themselves.
It's a story that Albertans need to hear, and it's a shocking story. And but obviously, like many Albertans, all Albertans, we all want you to live. We want to see you through this. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Sheila. We really sincerely wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for having me on your show.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.